Again, welcome again to Hope Community Church. We're glad that you're here. Especially, I know that on this particular Sunday, a lot of you are here with your family or your friends and here to witness the children dedication. So we're really glad that you're here. I am a huge fan of, and I do this from time to time, I'm a huge fan of those church signs that are up front, the old church signs that have the vintage thing. And let me just tell you, the wealth of great things that either accidentally or on purpose get put on those is too rich. And so once again, here's my little journey into great church signs. This one, do you know what hell is? Come hear our preacher. That was going to be the actual slogan of Hope Community Church until it's all about whether it's a verb or an adjective, right? Little grammar geek there for you. I think the pastor I think some pastor just got sick of, the way people normally do things at church and just finally said, give me the letters. Give me the letters. I'm going to write one here. I just can't get over this one. I think this is just funny. Now, this next one, I admit, it's not a church sign, but it was just too easy. Spelling is important, ladies and gentlemen. So I think that's supposed to say Santa, right? So there are many kids in counseling now because of this particular meeting at this school. So. And lastly, and most relevant to our topic for today, is this one. Don't let worries kill you. Let the church help. If you're new with us, we're in a series right now in the Gospel of Luke. If you have a Bible with you, open it up to Luke chapter 12. We are in the second week of kind of one passage. It was one passage from verses 12 all the way to verse 34. Really, it kind of continues on a little bit next week, but for sure, this links together verses 12 to 34. There's just no way to cover it in 1 week. So in order to kind of make it 1 week, I want to read last week's passage and make just a couple quick comments, but just kind of catch you up to speed. So if you have your Bible open to Luke chapter 12, let's go ahead and take a look at how this whole thing takes off. In Luke chapter 12, starting in verse 13, Jesus is speaking now to a group of people, and someone kind of heckles out. Someone in the crowd says, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." And Jesus responds back by saying, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, now he's going to use this as a teaching moment, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." That's his main teaching point. That is going to actually be his main teaching point today as well. So just follow. We got to follow that through for this week as well. So then he goes on. He says, let me tell you a little story here, right? And again, if Jesus is going to tell you a story after you just got done rebuking you, you're not going to come out as the good person in the story. I'm just telling you. So he says, the ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, what am I supposed to do now? I have no place to store all this abundance, right? Then he said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. And again, we are reading here from the New International Version. If you see other versions, if you have another version of the Bible open, a little more helpful here, it says, I will say to my soul, the very essence of who I am, soul, you've got everything met up in your grain. And that's the guy's mistake. The rest of it is just being a good farmer, right? That's a good agribusiness person. There's nothing wrong with that. But when we get there, he says, this is the sense, this is the place where I'm going to put my satisfaction and my hope for the future is my grain bin. The very center of my being, not just my financial future, not just the fact that I'll take care of my family, but the very essence of who I am, my soul. I said to my soul, you have plenty of grain. Guess what? Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. And then, so Jesus responds and he says, this is in the story now, so we're in the story, but God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get all this grain that you've made? It's not going to work. And then lastly, he says, this is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. It's not going to work. It's not going to satisfy your soul. That's what the basic message was last week. Had a lot of fun last week. We're going to have fun this week as well. So we're going to go on to this week. We're going to talk about the anxiety and kind of should be in quotes here, cure, but it is a cure, but we'll talk more about how that word is. I'm going to be using that word. Luke 12 through 22 through 34. Now, what I want to do today, I'm going to read through the passage, and then I'm going to walk through the passage with you like we normally do. I want to reserve enough time, though, because Jesus opens a can of worms that I want to deal with. And so we're going to go there and just open up this can of worms. So we're going to keep it in the context first, but then say, wait a minute now, what is this? How does this fit into our lives and into where we walk today? Okay? So let's just read through the passage. Then Jesus said to his disciples, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothes. Consider the ravens. They do not sow or reap. They have no storeroom or barn, yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable you are than birds. Who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life? Since you cannot do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest? Consider how the wild flowers grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, how much more will he clothe you, you of little faith? And do not set your heart on what you will eat or drink. Do not worry about it, for the pagan world runs after such things. And your Father knows that you need them. But seek his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So, great passage, difficult passage, no doubt about it. And we want to deal with this in our context as well. Let's try to stay in the context of what he's talking about there and kind of walk our way through this. Okay, so let's go back up to verse 22 here. We're just going to go top to bottom and kind of work through what's going on here. What is Jesus actually saying to his disciples? Remember the context, though. The context was a guy who raised his hand and said, Jesus, I want my share of that inheritance. And that's the most pressing thing on this guy's mind. And Jesus is continuing in this. So he's not shifting gears here. He's staying on this. He wants to teach a more global concept, but he's staying on this idea of money and possessions. And he says to them, don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about what you're going to eat, and don't worry about what you're going to wear. All right? And so this is the command. This is the big one. He is going to give a command here, and then he's going to give, I believe I have four reasons why he gives that command. Okay, so we're going to follow that right down. But here's the big one. Just think about that. Hey, you know what? Don't worry about that. If someone were to say that to you and say you were feeling a bit of an anxiety about, let's just give you an example, about buying a house. I don't know how I'm ever going to do that. How am I going to buy a house in today's economy? How's that going to happen? And a wealthy friend of yours comes up to you and says, you know what? Don't worry about that. You'd think at least, you'd hope at least, there's a checkbook involved with that from your wealthy friend, right? You think, maybe, right? And so here's what Jesus is trying to communicate. Guess what? You don't have to, if you're a follower of me, you don't need to worry about this stuff. Wow. Now let's look at his rationale why he would say something like that. Don't worry about your life. Don't worry about what you're going to eat. Don't worry about what you're going to wear. Don't worry about these kind of things. Wow. It's an amazing command, and it's a command. Do not worry. Let's look at his rationale. Reason number one, this is too great. This is a great quote. It says, the preceding parable about the folly of the rich fool's greed is intimately connected with the following text, the one we're just read, which deals with worry. Greed can never get enough. Worry is afraid it may not have enough. And I love this sentence. Worry is the emotional reward of material preoccupation. Isn't that a great line? I wish once in my life I could write a sentence like that or speak a sentence like that. I'm amazed it has a subject and a verb and a predicate, and that's hard for me coming from the Iron Range. But I just worry is the emotional reward of material preoccupation. That's why Jesus brings it up. If you're worried about this stuff, if you're so concerned about those things, you will be worried. And he says, guess what? If you put this in its right place, then that will not be characteristic of you. Let's go to his reasons. Here we go. Number one, and we're going to go through these kind of quick because I want to make sure we get time for our can of worms that we're opening up here. Number one, life is more than food, body more than clothes. So he's just linking to what he just got done saying. He linked to something he had said previously. Man does not live on bread alone, right? That he's trying to teach something here that's not just about how you can be sustained in this world. He's trying to teach you something about what real life is like. If you have all your food and all your clothing and all your housing and your bank account is full, will you be full of life? And Jesus says, not necessarily. It's more than that. So the first reason here is, if you're concerned about the subsidiary thing, if that's the thing that just drives you and it's constantly there, he says, I want to actually help you by saying that there's something bigger than that that you should be concerned about. That's reason number one. Reason number two. He says here that it just doesn't work. You're going to worry about something, it just doesn't work, right? Consider the ravens, right? They don't sow or reap, and yet God feeds them, and they don't have a storehouse or barn. Now he's linking to that previous story, right? About saving all this. They don't have any of that, yet they eat like crazy. How much more valuable than you than birds? And if you worry, are you going to add a single hour to your life? No, you're not going to add a single hour to your life. So since you can't do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest? Abraham Lincoln was, right when he got elected president, he was on his way to be inaugurated, and there was a river that they needed to cross, which was very difficult, called the Fox River. And along the way, everybody talked to him because it was a time when either it was flooding or it was somehow be an issue. And a lot of people were asking about this Fox River. And of course, that was a metaphor. In Lincoln's mind, it was a metaphor for what he was really worried about, because he wasn't really too worried about the Fox River. He was a little bit worried about, the Civil War coming, right? That's what everybody was on their mind. Because of your presidency, are we going to have this big Civil War? And that's what was causing him a lot of tension. And a Methodist preacher was there, and in one of these stops where they were going on their way there, and they said, what's the condition of the Fox River? And the guy said, well, I'm not exactly sure, but I do know one thing about the Fox River. And there's one rule that I always have. I never actually cross it until I get there. That's good advice, right? If you're always worried about the bridge and before you even get there, maybe you got a bigger problem. Maybe the bridge washed out, so you're not worried about crossing that bridge anymore. Or maybe it's dried all up. Who knows? But Jesus is saying here something. This doesn't work. Worry doesn't do anything. Third reason. What's actually going on? What's the root of the worry, right? Look at what he says. He says, consider how the wild flowers grow. Look at these. And he says, look, compare them, what God does here without any intervention whatsoever, and yet Solomon, the greatest king, the wealthiest king in Israel's history, the wisest king, he wasn't ever dressed as good as this. And he says this, if that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which, you know what, grass, I don't know if you notice this, but it's a seasonal thing. And people they cut it, and they take the clippings and they put it in a bag, and we don't. On the Iron Range, we burned them. That's what we did with our leaves and all that kind of stuff. That was awesome, too. We always started it with, what was it? Oh, yeah, gasoline. And it was awesome. You just shouldn't do that at home, kids. But that's the way we did it, and that's the way they did it then. This is what happens to all this stuff. You just collect it, and you just burn it, We don't. We put it in bags and all that kind of thing. But you're just saying, it just goes. that's you, if that's the grass, well, guess what? You're more valuable than grass, and guess what? God will take care of you. God will take care of you. The root of worry is ultimately a theological issue about what you believe as God as provider. Joel Green says this: the pivotal point in Jesus' instructions is theological. The practices he condemns are rooted in the erroneous perception of the character of God. Those who know God as Father will know God as the one capable of and committing to providing for his people. Knowing this, they are liberated from the consuming concerns of self-security. Thus liberated, they are able to orient their lives completely around the propagation in word and deed of God's restorative project. This is the kingdom, the coming of which overturns those worldly systems and values at odds with God's purpose. So as a follower of Jesus, he says, you do not need to be consumed with worry about these things. Reason number 4, and last reason, is God isn't just this cosmic force of trying to do things like make flowers grow or whatever. God is actually your Father. God is actually someone who is ultimately incredibly good. So don't set your heart, not an amazing phrase, set your heart. Don't do that. That's not if you do that, you will go nothing but to worry. And Jesus teaching here, no, that's what people who don't know the Father. But you who do know the Father, you know that he is going to take care of you. Then he gives what I'm going to call the anxiety cure. And again, I'm putting it in quotes, and I'm going to get to why I'm doing that here in I can tell you right now. We're all going to wrestle with anxiety the rest of our lives, worry. So it's not like you're going to be cured of it like you'd be cured of a disease and it's gone. But it is the cure. Okay, and it needs to be done every day. So it's not. It's more of a. It's not an inoculation from it. It's more of a. You got to take this and you got to do it all the time. And here's the cure. You need to go on a treasure hunt. And these verses 31 to 34 are ones we should just memorize and meditate and think about if this is an area we're wrestling with. Worry, anxiety, some of those things. What does he say? I'm going to walk you through what he says here. In some, like the steps, I don't know if I want to call them steps, but just walk through, and I do them logical, so I'm not going straight down the passage. He first says, seek what you already have. Seek his kingdom. And that word seek there means to look or to search after, like you would a treasure. So you make it your heart's desire to go after that, right? And you'll see it's something that you already have, because it says in verse 32, and we'll get there in just a second, that don't be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been what? Well pleased to give you the kingdom. So if you're a follower of Jesus today, you've been given the kingdom. The kingdom is a lot of things, but at least it's a recognition of the gospel of Jesus Christ that says a whole bunch of things to you, but at minimal it says, I'm okay in Jesus. I'm okay because of Jesus Christ. What he did, his finished work on the cross, his resurrection of the dead, screams that he paid the penalty for my sin and has victory over death. And so therefore, I know for certain, as a follower of Christ, someone who's trusting in him, who's bent my knee to Jesus and said yes to him, I know that my sins are paid for and my future is one of life. Does that mean it's not going to be suffering? No, I guarantee suffering. Jesus does. But he also says that's the way of the kingdom, and it's filled with life, and it's not filled with constant frustration. That's first step here. Number 2, know the goodness of God. Now, I'm doing this a little bit in backward order because I think you can't get to the third one until you get this one clear. For your Father has been, what? Pleased to give you the kingdom. Does your image of God include a God, the Father, who has a smile on his face saying, I can't wait to give this to you? That's the picture of God. Then it allows you to do the second part of that verse. Now, last week, I shared with you probably the most influential theologian in my life, and that is C.S. Lewis. I think he's just been incredible for me to think about, to wrestle with. I just did some things this week with C.S. Lewis. He was not alive, but But I want to share with you I should share you a whole bunch, but I'm just going to share you one quote from my second most influential theologian. And it's a woman, and her name is R.M. Treichler. It's my mom. And when trouble would come, here's her phrase she would say, "Comes the day, comes the way." What did that mean? That means that when trouble comes, God will give me the strength to go through it. Comes the day, comes the way. But the way doesn't come until the day comes. The way does not come until the day comes. Let's cross that bridge with God when we get there. That was just a real helpful thing. She said that all the time, once a month. As you know, we wrestled financially, we wrestled whatever, just to hear my mama say that. So if anybody here writes me an email and has anything negative to say about this email or about this quote, I will send you to my mother. Good luck with that. Third step in this journey is do not be afraid. Now, isn't that an interesting thing to say? It's almost as interesting as do not worry, right? So somehow worry and somehow fear are more than just an emotion. Because if they're an emotion, how do you not do that? You know, don't feel hungry right now, or don't feel something. It's like, wait a minute, there's something more that is actually in my control that I'm told to not be afraid. Don't allow fear to reign. What does that look like? Well, we'll get into that. Just a minute. What does that look like? What's a gospel way to go about that? We'll get into that in a few minutes. But here he says, as part of this treasure hunting is not allowing that thing to reign, fighting it. And then he says, fourth thing is you need to divest in some stuff. Look at how he says this. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Wasn't the thing that I was worried about? If you go back up to the beginning, wasn't the thing the guy was worried about is I want my inheritance from my brother? And then in this passage he says, hey, listen, don't worry about stuff. In fact, you know what? Why don't you just sell it? Or better yet, give it away. It's like, and a lot of people have taken this passage to, you know, like, oh, if you're a follower of Jesus, you shouldn't own any stuff. You should either sell it or give it away. All right? So, and I mean, there's definitely in America and some of our materialism and some of the things we have, granted, that's a thing we should think about. I don't think, that's not exactly what Jesus is saying here. Remember the context of what he's saying here. He's saying, is materialism the thing that's filling the grain bill of your, bin, thank you, grain bin of your soul, or is it God? What's on the throne? That's where it starts. And if it's God, guess what? Your stuff doesn't own you anymore. Your stuff does not own you anymore, so you can divest of it. It doesn't have, you don't have to hang on to it with an iron fist. You can get rid of stuff. And you feel free. Now, I'm going to say a couple things here, and then I'll move on. Number one, my uncle for many years worked odd jobs. One of the jobs that he did in the summer times was he worked on people's recreational boats, right? And my uncle used to have a lot of lines about boats, right? A boat is a hole in the water that you pour money into, was one of them. Another one was the 2 happiest days of a boat owner's life. You know what those are? The day they buy the boat and the day they sell the boat, right? For instance, like this, right? Now, own a boat. I'm not saying anything about boats. I like boats. Boats are great. But there's a sense of this, what you thought this joy would bring, and then it doesn't. And when you sell it, I've talked to people who have items. Forget it. If you own a boat and you love it, good for you. Can I borrow it? No. But there's something that happens when something that you thought would bring life and it doesn't, and then you get rid of it. It's like, oh. I have owned a little Italian sports car for 9 years. My dad gave it to me. Great, little Italian sport, little Fiat X19 is great, until it wasn't. And it really wasn't about 3 days into it. It basically sat in my garage. In 9 years, I put 2,500 miles on the car. 9 years. The last 3 years, I put 250 miles on the car. I sold it this summer. Sucker. No. I sold it this. I could say it there in North Dakota. They don't even have the internet, and they'll never hear this sermon. So, it's someone who wanted that car, and that's great. To them, it's an exciting thing. To me, it was like, it's gone. Yay, right? I think that's what Jesus is saying here. He's saying, does stuff own you, or do you own the stuff? And if you could give it away. So the thing here is, where's generosity on the stuff? The second thing he says here is give it to the poor. And, this is not Jesus' main point in this passage, is dealing with poverty. At the same time, it is all throughout Scripture that talks about us who are followers of Jesus to have some concern for those who don't have means. Let me just stop and just challenge you. Do you any way think of that in a way that's super constructive? Not helping that hurts is a great book by that title, but helping that helps, maybe helping an agency or having a child overseas, or a variety of different things you can do. Helping a food shelf or volunteering. If you don't have money, you can do some time. Are we concerned about those in need in some way, shape, or form? I think Jesus brings that up here. Fifth thing, if we're supposed to divest, what do we invest in? Jesus says, hey man, here's the deal. I'm going to tell you how to be greedy. And how you be greedy is providing purses for yourselves that aren't going to wear out. He wants you to be greedy, like we talked about last week. He wants you, but he wants you to fill that purse, in this case, your wallet, full of those things that are not going to wear out. That's life that's truly life, a treasure in heaven that's never going to fail, where no thief can ever come in and get your identity theft or anything. You can't do it, right? No moth will ever destroy. And then lastly, he says, this will ultimately lead then to a heart change. He says, when you go through this process, when you go through this treasure hunt, and you seek his kingdom, and these other things are going to be added to you, but you're focusing and putting God in the first place, and you're battling fear because you're resting on the goodness of God, and you're saying, you know what, I'm not going to be concerned about material stuff. I will be generous with it. I will look out for the needs of the poor, and I'm going to go and be greedy after God. He says something crazy happens. When that happens, your heart will follow that. Your heart will follow your treasure, and you will see a change. Okay, that's the passage. Now, the remainder of our time, I want to go, and Jesus just opened a huge can of worms, right? He opened a huge can of worms. He opened many of them, but I want to deal with one, and it's an issue that I think we don't talk about a lot in the church, and so I want to talk about it. If you know me, you know I like to talk about this issue because we all struggle with this, but I have gone through this in my own life. What about chronic anxiety or chronic depression? Jesus doesn't speak here about depression. I have a theory on this. I'll get to that in just a second. But let me just, for those of you, about a year ago I spoke about this. I'm going to give just a couple things that I did a year ago to catch everybody else up to speed, and the rest of it will be new. But just let me give a few things. First of all, anxiety. Webster's definition of what anxiety is that it's an abnormal and overwhelming sense of apprehension and fear, often marked by psychological signs, sweating, tension, increased pulse, by doubt concerning the reality and nature of the threat, and by self-doubt about one's capability to cope with it. I think that's a pretty good definition, actually. If you look up in the interwebs and you look and see what anxiety is, they'll say there is normal, whatever that means, anxiety. And I'm going to give a different word for that in a little bit. But they also talk about anxiety, what they would call disorders. Okay, and so in other words, it's to an extreme, and I'll give another word for that as well here. And these might manifest themselves as just generalized anxiety disorder, or OCD, where you're obsessively compulsive about something. You're having panic attacks. You're going through a PTSD, would be an anxiety thing, just some smell or some sight or you hear something and all of a sudden, wham, all this comes back. Or you might have social anxiety disorder. That's anxiety. Depression is a state of feeling sad, psychoneurotic or a psychotic disorder marked especially by sadness, inactivity, difficulty in thinking and concentration, a significant increase or decrease in appetite, and time spent sleeping, feelings of dejection and hopelessness, and sometimes suicidal tendencies. Depression, according to Mayo Clinic, is a mood disorder that causes a persistent feeling of sadness and loss of interest. It can be called major depression, major depressive disorder, or clinical depression. It affects how you feel, think, and behave, and can lead to a variety of emotional and physical problems. You may have trouble doing normal day-to-day activities, and depression may make you feel as if life isn't worth living. More than just a bout of the blues, depression isn't a weakness, nor is it something that you can simply snap out of. Depression may require long-term treatment, but don't get discouraged. Most people with depression feel better with medication, psychological counseling, or both. Other treatments also may help. 1 in 10 Americans will go through depression in their lifetime. 1 in 10. Okay, and if you look at in the rates in the world, we are the highest for depression. We have a 9.6, a little hard to see on this particular graphic, 9.6. And you'd think, places where there's maybe a lot of political unrest, or there's financial issues, maybe that would cause it to go even higher. That's not the reality. In those countries, there's way less depression. Nigeria is 0.8. And if you know anything about the political unrest and some of the economic issues in Nigeria, it's like, wow. And you can see that as well in other countries as well. Anxiety. This is a little graph. It's going to be hard for you to pick out this. What this is they went to college and university counseling centers and asked them to take polls of the people that came in. What's the main reason that you're here? Main reason that you came in today, all right? And the red is anxiety, and that is 46%. The blue is depression, which is 39%. So if you add those up, that would be 85% of the total people that come in. Now, can you exhibit both of those? I believe you can. I believe I have at the same time. So, a person could have said, these are the two things I came in for, because if you add those all up, the next one is the relationship issues, and those don't add up to 100, so there's more than one main reason sometimes. But you look at this is increasingly, anxiety went from being second place to by far first place. And I would agree with that. I look out and just in talking with you all in the last 10 years, you guys are stressed out, man. Relax a little bit. No, I'm just kidding. But no, seriously, I think the anxiety level, to me, is way, way higher. And again, it's my sample size, so it's people that write on the cards, my observation. So this is not be a clinical trial, but I don't think depression has went up, and this chart would say it hasn't. But anxiety significantly has went straight up. Now, let me give you my definition of both anxiety and depression, and this is as blue-collar a definition as you can possibly get. All right, here we go. I think it's like this. When you ride a chairlift and you're going up on the chairlift and there's always somebody with you, they're sitting right here on your shoulder, and they lean over to your ear and they say, "Jump. You can make it. Jump." Right? They do. I hear that voice. And there's something within you that goes, "Did I just think about jumping? Duh!" Right? You don't say that out loud because that would be creepy to the other people on the chairlift, but there's something in you that just says, that would hurt. I actually thought about doing it, but you don't, right? And then about 4 seconds goes by and you're thinking about what you're going to have for lunch, right? Just one of those thoughts that comes in, goes out. What I think depression and anxiety is where that thought comes in there and you just put two hands over your ears, and it can't get out, and it just bounces around. The difference between anxiety and depression is what you do about it. Anxiety, this is my definition. If you don't like it, email Mom Treichler at hopecc.com. But my definition, at least my experience was, these thoughts would come in and sometimes would cause almost panic attacks, and other times would make me not want to get out of bed all day. So that was the way it worked in my brain. It just seemed that's what's going on. I can't shake these thoughts. They're there. And how I responded was either anxiety or depression, or sometimes in the same day, both. So, I want to begin a conversation again. I want to do this every year. I want to have this because this is becoming a big deal, and I'm just thankful that Luke brings us there. But I want to give you a very unscientific, very I've thought about it for 2 days. So I mean, it's not like this is the catch-all, be-all to end any of this. But I want to give you a little scale. Okay, these are my words. These are not. But I want to go down the scale of anxiety. I'm only going to do anxiety. You could insert a depression in here as well, but just for the sake of time, we're just going to do anxiety. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to kind of stand here in different places on the stage so it makes sense. A concern, okay? A concern is a good thing. I'm concerned about something. I got up this morning, 4:30 in the morning, because I was concerned that if I stood up here like a blithing idiot without anything to say, that would be bad. You're all glad I had that concern, right? That's a good thing. You should be concerned about how to make your house payment. You should be concerned about retirement. You should be concerned about relationship issues. Those are not bad things, right? Worry is where it goes to the next level. And now I have moved from it's this concern so I can do something about it to, it's kind of this nagging sense. There's just this nagging sense about me. I'm not able to real function super well. Anxiety goes to where actually I'm having bouts of where I might even be having a few attacks, or I might be having moments of such pressure that I just have to put my head down on the desk and just sit there for a few minutes. This starts to just raise my anxiety. And what I'm calling all the disorders, whatever else, I'd say it's more of an obsession. It's just, these two hands are completely there. It's going rapidly all the time. Here's the news. I think a lot of people, when they look at these different areas, and as we talk about anxiety, and as the Bible says, don't worry, I think they think, well, that doesn't apply to me because I'm further down the road than what Jesus was referring to here. Right? He was probably more in the concern and the worry category. And that's true. He probably was. But on the side here, I want to put the ways of going about this. Luke 12, 31 to 34, which is pulling the gospel through every area of my life, making sure that my grain I keep saying that, grain bin of my soul is filled with God and not anything else that's idolatry. I want to pull everything else out. That's Luke 12, 31 through 34. The other way is then, there are times that I need gospel friends. I always need gospel friends, but specifically, I need to go to those people who are closest to me and say, help me out with this. I'm struggling with this. I don't do that every day. I mean, that would just get burdensome for everybody. But then I might need to go to a next level and say, I need someone to give me professional guidance on some of these things. And then lastly, I might have to go get psychiatric, which would involve medication. All right? So I would put it this way. This is my fancy scale, and it's not worth doing. But I would say that Luke 12 is applicable to everyone across the board. The Luke 12 is definitely needed. That is the foundation. That's how you're gonna make it through this. But for some reasons, it's not sinking in yet. So I need more strategies to help the gospel sink in. If I'm going through pretty significant worry, I need to get around gospel friends. Right? I need to, they can start to work those things in my life. But if I'm going through anxiety, I most likely need to see someone who can give me professional guidance. You might need to see a professional counselor. No shame in that. And lastly, if I am going through this obsession where it's debilitating, I very well might need to seek psychiatric help and medication. And by medication, let me be real clear. By medication, I mean prescribed medication. I don't mean meeting with your 3 accountability partners, Jack, Jim, and Johnny. Okay? Real clear, because a lot of people medicate their pain that way. I'm going to go meet with my 3 buddies, right? No, what I'm talking about here is getting professional help with that. My story, For those of you who have not heard my story, I'll make it very brief. A year ago, it was the renovation project. I gave a long version of my story, but for the sake of time today, I will just give a very short one. If you want to go back to that, it was the sixth message in that series. I became a follower of Jesus when I was a freshman at the University of Minnesota. 2 weeks later, I slipped into what I would call major depression, anxiety, however you wanted to have it. And what it was, the key thing that I couldn't get out of my brain was, see, I didn't believe like a lot of you. But for the first time in my life, I actually believed that there was a force of evil called Satan. He was a person, he was a real person, and he actually wanted to harm me and to take me out. Now that thought is I still believe that, but I think about it and I just think, well, God's bigger, and then what are we gonna have for lunch, you know? It's one of those thoughts. When I just that first thought that Satan's out to get me, boom, just sweat. I can just, my ears would get red and just go like through that. It was insane. And I don't wish it was 6 months hard, 18 months before I would say I'm having some semblance of victory over this, or I feel like I'm coming out of this. So I know what this is like. You can't just snap out of it. Think about other things. I can't even hear what you just said. I've got both hands over my ears. I can't do that. It will not change. And if that's where you're at, man, I have been there. And just so you know, you will not ever be told in this church, or if you are, they will meet my size 11 boots. Just don't do that. Just think about something else, right? So if that's where you're at, for a lot of us, when we're there, we hear Jesus' command that says, do not be afraid, do not worry, as one more condemning thing. I can't do that, Jesus. I've tried. For me, I hung on to this passage, Philippians 4, verses 4 through 9. I hung on to this passage. I memorized this passage. I thought about it, and I didn't feel it at all. It says, rejoice in the Lord always. I was not rejoicing in the sense of being happy, but in the sense of saying, God, you're the only thing that's going to fill my grain bin, and it feels terrible. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything. But I am. Fine. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Don't be anxious about anything. But in everything, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. Throw it out to God. Barf all over and say, God, I am dealing with this. Yes. And it says, the promise is the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. And then he gives what to do with your brains. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you've learned or received or heard from me, put it into practice. Or seen in me, put it into practice. And the God of all peace will be with you. And that's what I wanted more than anything, was just peace. I just wanted peace. Now, I wouldn't put my worst enemy through what I went through. And yet, I look at what God did through it, and I wouldn't change a thing of the final product. Well, okay, yes, I would, of course. I'm not saying I'm perfect. Believe me, my wife will testify. Can I get an amen, right? But she's not here, otherwise she'd be standing glory, right? I'm not saying that, but I would just say there's something that God did in that process that fundamentally changed me. I was an arrogant SOB coming in. Not as arrogant coming out. Maybe still an SOB. But I really was. And God humbled me. What worked? These are no steps. This is just what worked for me. And number one is I went to absolute war with my anxiety and depression. I fought like crazy to not say, I am this. I said more like, that's the depression talking. Don't listen to it. So I viewed it as it's out there. I think that's really important. 2, I got help. I didn't get professional help. I should have. A lot of us have a stigma about that. If that's where you're at, we've got a thing here at Hope. It's free. It's called Restoring Hope. Just someone to meet with you. I started talking with some people who knew what they were doing. They weren't professionals. I should have went to a professional. 3, I I put my hope in God. I just literally would just refuse to sink anymore. I'm going to hang on to you, God, no matter what, even if this is the rest of my life. And I really did think when you're in the middle of it, you are convinced it's the rest of your life. Those of you who've been through this, can I get an amen, right? You are convinced it's the rest of your life. 4, I tried to get things, I did things so that I could get the focus off myself. If you are in this and you're finding it difficult to go to work or to be exercising or praying or being with others or whatever, when you don't do that, you just tend to be more self-absorbed and the quiet does not help. At least it didn't help me. 5, just good theology. In my case, that God was actually bigger than Satan. And God and Satan are not equals. That Satan and Michael, the angel, are equals. That God was way bigger. And that to me was important for this. I knew that God then, I went from being really afraid of the devil to, I just can't stand him now. I just can't stand, it's a hatred, which I think is good theology. Growing in the confidence in Christ. Then lastly, and I know it sounds maybe not too hopeful, but time. It does. It does take time. I bring that up today because I don't want this passage to be used by yourself or by anybody else as a club in your life if that's what you're going through. And at the same time, I wouldn't be faithful to the passage to not tell you it is the answer. Those foundational truths of the gospel is what needs to go to the very, very core of your being. And in that, then you'll find help. How that happens, no matter how far down the road you are, it matters. But those truths are there, but they're not meant to be a club. So as we close today and as we move to a time of response here, I just want to ask you this. How are you pulling the gospel through your anxiety or your depression? How are you saying, Jesus Christ, I will seek you and your kingdom, and I will not let worry reign? Let's pray together.